back to the program. There is a conference taking place in London next week. It's called The Sexual Victimization of Boys. It's being organized by the London Children's Aid Society and the London and Middlesex Child Abuse Council. We're going to find out more about that conference right now. Len Kushnier joins us. He is a social worker with the Children's Aid Society, and Donald Dehaney is a survivor of sexual abuse. Welcome to the program.
Hi.
We've heard a lot lately about sexual abuse in boys, in particular here in London, because of the pornography ring that we've been finding a lot about these days. Len, I'm wondering if you could, because we throw that term around a lot, sexual abuse. Can we define it first? Can we sort of say this is what sexual abuse is?
We consider sexual abuse to be any type of sexual interference or sexual act that's committed on a child. In Ontario, legally, the child is under the age of 16. So anyone that has some type of unwanted sexual experience is considered to have had sexual abuse. Now, typically, sexual abuse is committed by someone who's in a caretaking role. If you look at the legal definition, otherwise we use the word sexual assault if it's someone who's a stranger or not entirely in a caretaking role over the young boy.
Can it also be someone, though, who's just exerting some power over someone, that there actually isn't any touching that takes place or anything like that, but there is still some implication of sexual abuse?
Well, certainly. And power is an important issue in this whole thing because there is a power differential when we're talking about abuse. But for anyone who's a child, they really don't understand or have the ability to consent to sexual experiences. So any type of engaging of a child in a sexual act, even if it isn't hands-on, if it's getting them to do something sexually, for example, to taking pictures of them or standing in front of them and exhibiting yourself to a child, that is still sexual abuse.
How many boys are sexually abused, let's say, annually? What are the figures? We hear a lot about young females. There seems to be generally more of a concern when young females are sexually abused. How many boys? What are we talking about?
We're not clear on the exact numbers because it's a very difficult area to research. Obviously, we hear a number of figures. In Canada, the Badgery report back in 1984 said that 1 in 3 males will experience some type of unwanted sexual experience before they reach the age of 18. About 1 in 5 will actually have a hands-on experience with sexual abuse. And that coincides a bit with the States. 1 in 5, 1 in 6 is what some of the numbers in the States are. But we do know so far that 30% of all young child victims are males. So 1 in 3
that's a really high figure, 1 in 3. Yet society doesn't seem to let boys be victims. Why do you think that is, Donald, as a survivor of sexual abuse?
I first want to say that I agree with what Len said, because since I went public and had my abuser charged, that was in 81, 100 males have told me in the last 13 years that they've been abused. So, I mean, I certainly do not feel alone and different anymore, because the thing that happened with me is that going public, charging my father, it empowered me. And so I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Well, why is it, do you think, that as society, we still, with the pornography ring, there were so many boys involved in that, it still seems to me that we're not dealing with that issue? Why do you think that is, that we just don't deal with the fact that boys are victims of sexual abuse?
Because I think society is blocked by their prejudice against certain things. Like, one of the reasons why I want to speak at this conference is that I think that my abuse continued for a longer period of time. I did not come forward with it because of prejudice that I was experiencing. For example, religious prejudice. I was in a strict religion, so any signs that I displayed of different behavior were blamed on religion. Sexual preference. I think that people connect sex with children with homosexuality, and they're prejudiced by that. So it's really a lot of issues that they're afraid to get close to.
So when did you finally decide to share this information with somebody else? When did you finally decide that you had to confront it and you had to come forward?
It's at many different levels. I think, well, the first one is that in my family, my younger brother told someone.
And okay, continue, because I've got a follow-up with that.
Okay, one of the things that people don't understand about this is that abuse within a family is like, my brother told my mother, but my mother was also a victim in a relationship with my father. So when she believed us, which is unusual, she believed us and reinforced us, But she could not do anything. So we were not disappointed. It was like, oh yeah, okay, more abuse. We just, exactly. I mean, nothing was done. Then the next step was a couple years later, it was taken to religious leaders.
Right.
And nothing was done again.
Well, nothing was done. What was their reaction when you told them that this was happening? How did they react?
Oh, it was very bad. And this is what my problem with this is that I was asked what positions was I in. I was not a human being. I remember I was 12 when I had to speak about this.
Yes.
And it was like I was being interviewed. It was nothing. I was not a person.
So there was nobody was sympathetic to what you were saying?
No, what their concern was how it would affect the church, not us. And they didn't think they had a responsibility to report to the authorities. And this is way back. This is 73, so...
While we're on that point, today, would somebody have the responsibility? Would they have to report that, Len?
I think people are more aware now that the laws are very strict about reporting, particularly for professionals who work with children. And I think as a society we've grown in that terms of taking responsibility. But there's still some areas where we have to remind people because there's some gray areas, and some professionals have played with that area a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly the reporting has been much better, which is why we've had so many incidents now to investigate and work on over the last 10 years, because the reporting is just, skyrocketed.
So, Donald, you went to your mother, you went to someone in the church.
Someone went to my mother. My family went to the church.
Okay.
For me, myself,
So it was your brother, right? That went to your mother.
And it was another brother that went to the church.
Okay.
Nothing was done.
So when did you go to somebody?
I remember this, I had a guidance counselor when I was like in grade 10, asked me, anything you want to talk about? And I was just laughing in my head. I thought, like I'm going to tell you? And one of my concerns with the teaching profession is that I was centered out for my religion, I was shy and totally introverted. And instead of becoming my friend and making me feel valuable as a person, they attacked my shyness and this kind of thing. So, like, I'm going to go to a teacher who makes fun of me? No. Do you understand? So I think that if I don't blame all teachers, but I think that if teachers value every child as an individual and not a clone
Mm-hmm.
of what our society expects of them, then maybe the trust will be there to open up.
So at what point did you get help?
Not until I was like 20, and I just went to my family doctor and I said, I'm confused and I'm mixed up, and he gave me a name for a social worker.
Okay.
And that is the beginning of my process.
And it's been a long process.
It's been a long process, but I think that it was empowering to get a conviction, to go public, because I didn't have to...
We'll talk about that a bit when we come back from the commercial break. We'll leave it there for now. When we come back, we're going to talk more about Donald's story. We'll also find out more about the effects of sexual abuse on boys. Please stay with us. More to come.
Only sunlight can make things bright. New Sunlight with bleach for brighter whites and colors.
The average sumo wrestler weighs 420 pounds. The average person puts 9,000 times that much weight on their feet every day. The average shoe just wasn't designed to take this kind of pressure, which is why Dr. Scholl's did not create the average insoles. Using space-age materials, Dr. Scholl's has created a new line of insoles and inserts to give your shoes revolutionary support, cushioning, and shock absorption. Take a load off with Dr. Scholl's.
Don't let your allergies keep you trapped indoors. Get Seldane. Seldane relieves your runny nose, itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, and more day after day and without drowsiness. So whatever your allergy symptoms are, get relief and get outside, because it's Seldane time again. Just ask your pharmacist.
Opening these doors opens the doors to your future. Les came to the Center for Lifelong Learning through a job developer program. Within a year, Les had earned his high school diploma specializing in accounting and went on to a full-time job in the field of municipal taxation.
We help Les open the doors to his future. We can help you with free, personalized adult education. Call the Center for Lifelong Learning.
The next session begins April 25th. Call the Center for Lifelong Learning to register.
Only sunlight can make things bright. New sunlight with bleach for brighter whites and colors.
Clothing for Ruta Pocious has been provided by Kings Mills in London. Design your exclusive style with unique fashions from Kings Mills.
Welcome back to the program. We're talking about the sexual victimization of boys on today's program with Len Kushnier. He is a social worker with the Children's Aid Society, and Donald Dehaney is a survivor of sexual abuse. There's also a conference being held in London, I should say, later next week. We're going to give you that information a bit later in the program, so stick around for that. Donald, how has sexual abuse affected your life overall? You were 20 by the time you finally went to see your physician, and then you were able to get into a treatment program to sort things out for yourself. But what have the effects been?
First, I have to go backwards because my life is together. I have a life. I'm happy. But I've been to hell and back. And I feel like I did time as a child with this. I mean, I feel like I did time. It was horrible. And the recovery process is, I was totally introverted. There was 2 periods of my life where I never spoke.
For how long?
I would only speak at home. And it's because all the levels of trust are totally broken, and you don't know, your feelings are, you don't understand your feelings. You're sexually mixed up. You don't know if you're gay or straight or what. And I think one of the myths with this is that people think, this is why people don't come forward, is they're afraid that if you admit to being abused by another of the same sex, that it means you are gay or
so because of the implications of that, those who are being abused say, what are people going to think of me?
Right.
Okay.
And they think that pedophiles are necessarily homosexual, and that's not true. My father was not homosexual. That's one of the other myths. So another thing, trusting, as far as friendships, trusting God. I call God, I got a busy signal. And what I mean by that is that I just could not connect to a higher power when this was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So there was so many levels of recovering. Trusting the therapist was the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Finding my first real friend at 25. And that's when my life really began, is when I found my first real friend.
Are you bitter because
No.
of what has happened in your life?
No, see, I have taken an experience and I use it in a positive way, because think of the 100 people who've told me they've been abused. I've been a positive example for them. I'm on this program right now because I want to be a positive example for young boys who, who are, this is happening to them, or they've come out of it and they're mixed up. There is hope. Get help. Talk. Tell people about it.
But what if, what we've been talking about, we've got this porn ring here in London, and we've learned of all these young boys who have been involved, and what do you say to someone who says, yeah, but I have talked, I've tried, and they try once, and they're not met with a very positive response, or someone who is very supportive or sympathetic? What do you recommend that they do at that point? Because I would think that would scare them off, and they'd say, oh boy, this isn't making it worse when I talk about it.
I want to say something to that, because I hear that too. I did not get response. My family did not get proper, healthy responses to this when we came forward. But one of the things that I want to say, someone told me when I was like a teenager that I'm not special. Do you think you're special, Donald? Well, I am special. And I think every victim is special. And that's why those boys, even if they don't get at the first time, second time help, because they're special, they're human beings. That's why you shouldn't quit until you get help.
We haven't talked a lot about the myths associated with sexual abuse. Maybe we could touch on some of those. The one thing I'm wondering about, sexual abuse, is it an isolated incident, or is it something that happens over a long period of time, a prolonged period of time?
Well, it can be both. Typically, the longer and more intrusive the sexual abuse, the more harmful it would be to the victims. But, of course, a case of stranger rape, and boys do get raped and assaulted in the dark. I've heard some horrific stories about that will be very traumatic to a child. But there are some isolated incidents of one-time touching and so on. It depends on the circumstances and the relationship that they have to the abuser.
Can one isolated incident have the same impact as abuse over a prolonged period of time?
Well, we're not always sure as to what makes up the impact that a child has. Certainly, we know that about 40% of victims who've had some type of experience will end up requiring therapy to help them out. Others, depending on the parents that they have, the types of natural supports they have, may be able to get by their experiences and work with it without too many damaging effects into adulthood.
Okay, true or false? Most sexual abuse is committed, or the perpetrator is a stranger.
That's false, because most of the time it's someone that's known to them. Although males have a greater chance of being abused outside the home than females, almost 10 times more often are they abused outside the home, the perpetrator is known to that child.
Why is that? Do we have any idea why that is?
Well, there seems to be less intrafamilial abuse, at least now. I mean, these numbers are going to change as we learn more about it, but so far the abuse in families more often involves female children than it does male children. And so males are targeted more often by pedophilic men outside, and pedophiles have an average of 150 victims, male victims, and 50 female victims, those that go after young girls.
Is there something that's going wrong in that family then, if that can happen outside of the home, that the child won't say no to the stranger, or can't get away from them, or doesn't go back to the family and report it? Is that another myth that, does this happen in families where there is a lot of communication and there's a strong foundation?
Some victims have a greater predisposition to being victimized because they don't have some supports at home, and they may be seeking attention outside the home. And a lot of pedophiles are very skilled at attracting men or young boys that are very needy and
so they
sort
of stalk their victims. Then they sort of know what to
seem to
look
have
for.
radar sometimes, but anybody can be abused. So we don't want to say that there is a certain character of a person that can be abused. Anybody can be victimized as a child.
And we don't want to obviously lay blame on the victim either, which is so often what happens. The other thing, when I think of this whole issue, and I'm sure this is probably something that is part of the problem, I always think that the perpetrator is male. Is that true or false?
There are female sex abusers too. In fact, we're learning more and more about abuse committed by females. I work with adult survivors in group therapy programs, and we're very surprised at the numbers that are coming forward talking about female abuse, which is very difficult because many boys have a struggle in admitting that they were abused by a woman. Again, it's one of those other myths that you should enjoy the experience if you've been abused by a woman, but it is not enjoyable. It's still very damaging to them.
You can be a great source of inspiration, I know, to some people who are watching today. What would you say to them if they've been considering disclosing to somebody, considering getting some help? Some words of encouragement?
I think that it's not like a one-step thing. It's like you've got to keep talking about it till you get attention. I think that going to a family doctor. I think if you can't talk to your parents and you can't talk to a guidance counselor, talk to a doctor. I mean, there's always someone to talk to. But one of the things that
is that realistic if a child is 13 or 14 to know to go and see your family doctor? That's what I'm wondering about. Should they tell a friend? Who should they confide in?
There certainly are the children's helplines now, and I think children need to know that there are specialists in the police force and in children's aid, and that those numbers are more and more given out by schools as emergency numbers. But the children's helpline is a good place to call because it's a number that you just get on the phone, and there's somebody who's receptive and willing to hear at the other end. So that in the children's professions, more and more, they are ready to hear it, and children need to know that they can talk to those people.
And Donald, if you don't get the reaction you want, what should you do?
I think you just keep, because maybe you're not going to be believed. Like, you can go, there's so many different places now that you can go to. There's lines to call, but there's like the nurse at the school, principal. I mean, there are people who will act on it. And I think that in my case, it was that the initial responses were negative, so I quit speaking. And I think that I would encourage, especially now, like, things have changed. I mean, more people are aware of this. This is not an unknown subject, Right. But for me personally, I think that what I want to remove is the stigma of this only happens in weird families and it's weird people. No, it's your neighbor, it's professional people, it's non-professional people, it's all over.
Which is what we're finding out with the porn ring as more information comes out. Thank you very much both for being here. Len Kushnier is a social worker with Children's AIDS Society, and Donald Dehaney is a survivor of sexual abuse. We're going to give you more information now on a conference that is going to be taking place in London next week. If you're interested in attending, here's the information.